So I'll continue with the introduction, and I'll just say that Brian's passion is relationships, is family, interpersonal dynamics, positive aspects of relationships, and how those can be changed and improved, and how those have his work during his postdoc here is also how those have biobehavioral pathways, how they can change health and physiology. And so it has been a pure pleasure having him as a postdoc here. It's been, he started this year, it's been a short while, but when he dives into something, he is so intense. And so he has already worked on many projects, a collaborative project with Danielle that's already under review, looking at parental relationship dynamics. He has been having fun looking at the SAGE study with all of its daily diary dynamics of relationship connection. And he'll be hopefully making some light of that. Cliff was involved in that study because it was an autism caregiver group. And at the end, we had a mindfulness intervention. So I think relationships, if you hear about the latest from Sonia Ludmirsky, who's one of our, happiest happiness researchers, someone who has done most of the little mini intervention studies on what makes people happy. She has found that her control groups make people as happy as her treatment groups when it's talking to someone else. So they're talking about something not important, and they still have as much of a boost in positive affect. So her conclusion these days is happiness is in social connection. I just love that. Okay, so Brian has he came from doing a postdoc at UNC with Barb Fredrickson. He has already been a professor at Clackamas Community College and loves teaching. He got his PhD in social and health from Kent State with a minor in quant. And it's so wonderful to have someone with his modeling skills make sense of data. That's kind of like your theory can only be as good as how well you can test a complex model, in my mind. He is, and he went to Kenyon College, I didn't know that. He has many awards and he's absolutely prolific. And if he doesn't have a new paper lined up for like the next month, I think he gets antsy. So Brian's going to be giving some job talks in the next few months, and this is a dry run. So I think any comments personal comments you want to email him afterward if we don't have time during the discussion. He welcomes feedback. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. I apologize to those of you who have already heard this. Some people saw it at our WIP thing. So yeah, hopefully it's enjoyable the second time. But for those of you who haven't seen it, yeah, I hope this is enjoyable. And what can you see? Can you see presenter mode or can you see slides?
Presenter mode.
You see presenter mode. Okay. Let's try this. What do you see now?
Sorry, no, we saw it looked correct before.
Oh, it looked correct. Okay. Let me try that again.
Sorry about that.
So now it looks right? Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to present. Alyssa, thank you for the very nice introduction. Okay. My name is Brian Don, and I'm going to tell you about my research program. It's on motivation, affect, and mindfulness in relationships, understanding pivotal social interactions that contribute to mental and physical well-being. So as Alyssa suggested, my passion is understanding relationships. So I want to start this talk asking the question, why do we care about understanding relationship functioning in the first place? Well, there are a lot of answers to this question. For instance, relationships are an innate psychological need. Relationships are crucial to development when it comes to cognitive development, physical development, emotional development. People who grow up with an absence of relationships or neglected, they don't develop in all these ways that are crucially important. One that I think is a little bit underrated that Alyssa was alluding to is that relationships are just one of the things that make life innately rewarding. If you think about what are some of the best moments of your everyday life, I would bet that a lot of them involve interacting with other people. But what I'm going to focus on for this talk is that we have a lot of evidence suggesting that relationships are a key contributor to mental and physical health. So I want to dive into that a little bit more closely. So when I say that we know that relationships contribute to health, we have extensive evidence demonstrating that broad indicators of the presence or functioning of relationships, things like perceptions of loneliness or social integration, contribute to physical health, such as in predicting mortality risk. But researchers have recently called for a better understanding of the precise psychological, biological, and relational processes by which relationships actually contribute to better well-being. So how does this actually happen? How do relationships contribute to physical or mental health? Well, in my research, I really try to disentangle this question. So I'm a social health psychologist, and broadly speaking, my goal is to understand how to promote mental and physical well-being through the lens of relationships, motivation, and affective science. I'm going to provide you with an overview of my theory-derived research program, and then we'll dive into 2 studies. So the first assumption of my research program is that relationships are critical to mental and physical well-being. So extensive research demonstrates that, broadly speaking, relationships contribute to crucial mental and physical well-being outcomes such as mortality risk, cardiovascular disease, life satisfaction, etc. So the question for relationships research and in my own research has been to home in on these specific reasons or processes by which relationships contribute to these broad outcomes. So not all relationships are beneficial, and relationships that are low quality can actually be detrimental to these same outcomes that I have listed here. So what are the specific processes by which relationships influence well-being? Well, this leads us to the second assumption of my research, which is that I really focus on these pivotal interpersonal processes like social support and gratitude and capitalization, because these specific interactions, the success or failure of them, theoretically plays a crucial role in determining whether close relationships promote well-being or whether they actively undermine well-being. So as I mentioned, these interactions, they don't always go well. So what contributes to their success or failure? Well, I really focus on, I suggest that we can understand the success of these pivotal social interactions by focusing on people's pre-existing motivation and affective experiences. So when people engage in a social support or gratitude interaction, they're going to enter into those interactions with motivational and active affective processes that might undermine or might support the success of these interactions. So 2 motivational and affective processes I'm going to talk about are approach motivation and positive emotions, and how these support or undermine these types of interactions. So what will this talk cover? I'm going to first talk about how positive emotions influence relational adjustment during the transition to parenthood. I'm going to talk about how approach motivation contributes to positive interpersonal processes like gratitude and capitalization. And then I'm going to talk about current and future directions where I integrate the study of mindfulness, meditation, and psychophysiological processes into my research. So part 1, I'm going to talk about the role of positive emotions in promoting relational adjustment during the transition to parenthood. This study just came out at JPSB, and I would love for you to read it if you find this at all interesting. So the transition to parenthood is this time that comes with a lot of different challenges. Parents are adjusting to a lack of sleep. They're adjusting their work schedules to deal with the new child. They have lots of childcare demands. And as a result of this, parents experience changes in their relationship satisfaction and social support. And this can cause a lot of disruption and challenges. And what we know about this period is that the quality and health of new parents' relationship influences both the parents themselves, their mental and physical health, and influences the development and health of the child across the course of time. So it's critically important to understand how to reduce or prevent these maladaptive relational changes for new parents. Now, if you study the transition to parenthood. And if you sort of read about it and talk to people about it, it kind of seems like it's this really hard, stressful, terrible time. And it absolutely is a hard time. But we also know that some parents and a lot of parents actually experience good stuff during the transition to parenthood too. They experience positive emotions like happiness and gratitude and joy. And prior research on the transition to parenthood had really only examined positive emotions as an outcome of successful adjustment or coping. The broaden and build theory of positive emotion suggests that positive emotions aren't just an outcome of successful coping, but rather that these positive emotions can build key social resources across the course of time. So to the extent that new parents are actually experiencing positive emotions, this should help them become resilient to these negative changes that might be experienced during this stressful and challenging time. So what I suggested was when parents experience, happiness, gratitude, and joy during this new transition with their child, this should actually be functional rather than simply be an outcome of successful adjustment. And this led to the prediction that new parents' positive emotions will longitudinally predict enhanced adjustment in terms of their relationship across the course of time. And so I engaged in a data collaboration, which was the first ever study to involve two dyadic and longitudinal studies of new parent couples. And so this was a collaboration between researchers at UNC, in Chapel Hill, at University of Minnesota, Texas A&M, and Arizona State. And we had two studies, the first of which was a year long, involved 4 waves of data and 104 new parent couples. The second of which was 2 years long, had 5 waves of data and 192 new parent couples. And so the basic method was this. Participants started in the prenatal period when their relationships tend to be happy and they're, happily anticipating the birth of their child. And then they completed 3 or 4 surveys, depending on which study it was, in the postpartum period. Participants provide self-report variables on positive emotions, relationship satisfaction, and perceptions of support. And then in study 2 only, they also engage in an observe social support behavior task. So this is where they're actually coming to the lab, have an interaction, and we're videotaping what's going on in terms of their support behaviors. And I want to focus in a little bit more on this behavioral coding task, because this is a thing that I use in my research a lot. So couples would come into the lab and they would be instructed to share something with their partner that they're maybe struggling with in daily life, that they need help with, or a goal that they're trying to achieve. And their partner is just given the opportunity to respond to this. Then, after about 5 minutes of interacting, we video record their interaction, and independent coders they're given a coding scheme, and they code for emotional support, instrumental support, and informational support. And this type of paradigm where we look at things like social support, capitalization, and other types of gratitude behaviors, for example, I frequently use this in my research because it provides a semi-objective lens into relationship interactions. We know that this semi-objective lens correlates with people's perceptions, daily experiences, and outcomes. And it just provides this independent perspective on relationship experiences that self-reports cannot. So returning back to this study, the analysis approach. So we implemented an aggregated, dyadic, multi-level lagged approach to the data analysis. So what we wanted to ask was, do these prior wave positive emotions predict the subsequent wave relational outcomes, controlling for the prior wave relational outcomes? And we aggregated across waves, but also examined wave as a moderator. So this allowed us to say, was this effect stronger at one particular wave, or was the wave moderator not statistically significant? And so this was similar across all the different waves. We also tested for gender differences because, of course, gender is salient during this time. There may be differences between mothers and fathers as they make this transition to parenthood. So I'm going to summarize the pattern of results across 2 studies. And so these are the results for relationship satisfaction. Then I'll show you the social support variables after this. So what we found is that aggregating across waves, after controlling for prior wave relationship satisfaction, positive emotions at the prior wave predicted subsequent relationship satisfaction for fathers only in study 1, and for both mothers and fathers in study 2. So we have evidence that supports our hypothesis for fathers only in study 1, for both mothers and fathers in study 2. And we found that wave did not act as a moderator. So this was true across the different waves of data collection. For perceptions of social support, results were very similar. So positive emotions at the prior wave predicted subsequent wave perceived support for fathers only in study 1, and for both mothers and fathers in study 2. So here are the results for observed support behavior. And again, we only had this in study 2. But when we examined this in study 2, we found that prenatal positive emotions predicted some, although not all, types of observed support behavior as coded by these independent observers. This was true for both mothers and fathers. So across these different outcomes, for relationship satisfaction, for perceptions of social support, and for observations of social support in the laboratory, we have evidence that participants' positive emotions do indeed bolster their relationship well-being across the course of time, even during this challenging relational period during the transition to parenthood. We found that this did not matter when during the transition these emotions occurred. We did find some evidence that this appeared to be especially helpful for fathers. And I'll note that in study 2, where we found that it was true for both mothers and fathers, the effect size was a little bigger for fathers. So the consistent pattern of it kind of being more helpful for fathers was true across both studies. And we had a self-efficacy interpretation of this finding, which is that, there's more expected of mothers during the transition to parenthood. And in fact, we know that the burden of childcare is placed more heavily on mothers, but that fathers actually feel less prepared for parenthood. They feel less self-efficacy about how to be a parent, and that this can take a toll on their feelings of satisfaction during the transition to parenthood. So we think that part of the reason this might be occurring is because positive emotions may help fathers feel especially resilient during this transition when they basically don't feel they know how to be a father. So that's one possible interpretation for this finding. Okay, so we've seen how positive emotions are an affective means by which these key interactions like social support may be enhanced. Next, I want to focus on a motivational factor that contributes to a different type of interaction, which is positive interactions like gratitude and capitalization. So I want you to consider a purely hypothetical couple named Jay and Beyonce. And Jay has good news. His company is being acquired. He shares this news with his partner Beyonce, and she responds really positively. She's super happy for Jay, and this really enhances Jay's positive emotions about this event. This is called capitalization, when we share good news with significant others in our life, and their response actually influences the way we feel about that particular event. It can really enhance our positive emotions, or it can potentially mute those positive emotions. One more hypothetical event: Beyonce composes a chart-topping song for Jay. Jay sincerely expresses his appreciation to Beyonce. This is called gratitude, when we express appreciation in the context of our intimate relationships. But we know that these types of positive interpersonal interactions are associated with lots of good stuff. But I wanted to ask the question, are these positive interpersonal interactions equally positive for everyone? Does everybody respond in the same way to something like a capitalization or gratitude interaction? One variable that I thought was particularly relevant is called social approach motivation. Individual differences in the extent to which people desire to create positive interactions, moments, and experiences with close others. We know that this variable is linked to a lot of positive stuff: greater relationship satisfaction, sexual desire, attachment security, the list goes on. But the question is why? Prior research had said it's about exposure, that people who are higher in approach motivation, they go out and seek out more positive events like gratitude and capitalization, but it's not about reactivity. These people don't have stronger responses to the events. But this idea was based on studies that used retrospective reporting. So you ask someone, over the course of the past month, how many positive events did you have and how much did you enjoy them? The problem with that is retrospective reporting is not very accurate. And if you ask someone how many positive events did you have and how strong was your reaction to them, those two things are going to be compounded. Your memory of how strong the event was and your memory of how many events you had are going to be confounded with each other. And so I revived this upward reactivity hypothesis and suggested that approach motivation does indeed enhance people's positive emotions when they have a positive interpersonal interaction. If you're motivated to seek out these positive events, that's probably because you really enjoy these positive events. But I suggested we needed the right methodology, and that especially we needed to just expose people who are higher in approach motivation to positive events like gratitude and capitalization, and then ask them immediately after the interaction, how do you feel? We also tested this with a little bit of diary data, daily experience, but the key real method here is to expose them in a laboratory. The other thing that I wanted to test was, if Jay is experiencing this super strong reaction, he feels really good when he has a capitalization interaction. This should also be good for Beyonce. That Beyonce is going to notice. This is called upward observability. And Jay's reaction is going to spill over into Beyonce. This is what we called upward crossover. So enhanced partner positive emotions. So I tested these ideas in 3 studies. Studies 1 and 2 were couples recruited from the community surrounding UNC Chapel Hill, where they engaged in a standardized gratitude interaction in the laboratory. In study 3, couples were recruited from the community, and they engaged in both a gratitude and a capitalization interaction. And then they also kept track of their daily relational experiences for 14 days and reported on their emotions and their relationships stuff for that 14-day period. So I want to give you an overview of the method for the laboratory-based interactions. Participants engaged in they completed a pre-discussion questionnaire. This is where we assess their approach motivation, and we also assess their global levels of positive emotions. We wanted to make sure that people who are higher in approach motivation were not just simply higher in terms of their overall experience of positive emotions. So we always controlled for that global level of positive emotion prior to engaging in the gratitude or the capitalization interaction. Next, participants engaged in the gratitude and capitalization discussion task. We coded for the partner's behavior during the gratitude and capitalization discussion. Because if you are really trying to make sure that people who are higher in approach motivation are responding more strongly to the interaction, you want to make sure that the interactions are relatively equal for people who are lower versus higher in approach motivation. Because one could imagine that maybe people who are higher in approach motivation just pick partners who are really positive during these interactions. And so what we did was we coded the interactions to make sure that the positivity was relatively equal during these interactions for people who are high in approach motivation versus low in approach motivation. And so we controlled for partner behavior during each of the interactions, and the results were always the same when we did that. Finally, after the interaction, We assessed, positive emotions and perceptions of partner positive emotions. We always assess both people's positive emotions after the interaction. And so this is the basic paradigm. So the analytic strategy. Because studies 1 and 2 were nearly identical, we conducted an integrative data analysis, which is a strategy that's used to enhance power. It pools the data to enhance power and allows for testing differences between the two studies. We also bootstrap tests of indirect effects to test the upward crossover and upward observability effects. In studies 3, we engaged in multi-level modeling of dyadic data. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to present the results of studies 1 and 2 together, because that's the integrative data analysis. Then I'm going to show you results of study 3. So here's how we test the hypotheses. So to test the upward reactivity hypothesis, it examines the association between actor approach motivation and actor positive emotion, controlling for the person's trait positive emotion, the partner's behavior and motivation, and a few other confounds. Then we're going to look at the observability hypothesis. So does Jay's approach motivation indirectly predict Beyonce's perception of Jay's positive emotion during the interaction via Jay's positive emotion during the interaction? And then again, we're going to control for Jay's trait positive emotion, Beyonce's behavior and motivation. So we're making sure this isn't due to Beyonce's approach motivation, and a number of confounds. And then finally, the crossover effect. So we're going to look at the indirect effect of Jay's approach motivation on Beyonce's positive emotions during the same interaction via Jay's positive emotions. One more note before we jump into the data is that there's 2 perspectives in each of these interactions. So in a gratitude interaction, someone can be the target, the person who is receiving the expression of gratitude, or you can be the expressor, the person who's saying they're thankful. In a capitalization interaction, someone can be the person who's sharing good news, and someone can be the person who is responding to the good news. Both of these perspectives or both of these people can be positive in both of the interactions. But for simplicity, I'm going to tell you about the perspective of the target and the capitalizer. In the paper, we test both of these perspectives, and the results are pretty similar regardless of the perspective. But just for simplicity, I'm going to tell you about one perspective in each of the types of the interactions. Okay, so here's the data. Do targets who are higher in approach motivation report enhanced positive emotions after the gratitude interactions? The answer is yes. If Jay is higher in approach motivation and his partner expresses appreciation to him, he will have more positive emotions after that interaction as compared to someone with lower approach motivation. This is true when you control for his trait positive emotions. It's true when you control for his partner's behavior and a number of other confounds. So, does this have implications for his partner? How is Beyonce going to experience this? Well, Beyonce will perceive him as being higher in positive emotions during that interaction via his positive emotions during that interaction. And there will be crossover. So if Jay experiences more positive emotions during that interaction, then Beyonce will tend to report greater positive emotions during that interaction as an indirect result of Jay's approach motivation. So that was the results of study 1 and 2, but we just tested that in a gratitude interaction. In the theory, the overall idea was this should generalize to positive interactions in general, not just gratitude interactions. So in study 3, we tested this in a capitalization interaction. And the question is, do capitalizers who are higher in approach motivation, if Jay is sharing his good news with Beyonce, does he report positive emotions in this interaction? And once again, the answer is yes. When Jay is sharing that good news, he's experiencing more positive emotions. Once again, it's true when controlling for partner behavior, when controlling for Jay's general experience of positive emotions, etc. And is there this crossover effect? Does Beyonce experience more positive emotions indirectly because of Jay's approach motivation? And the answer is yes. Just as a note, we didn't have perceptions of partner positive emotions in study 3, which is why I didn't present on observability here. So finally, we had all this observational laboratory-based data. We wanted to do a test of daily diary data. So in study 3, couples provide reports, 14 days of nightly reports. And what they're doing in this is they're writing about the most notable thing that happened in their relationship that day. So it was an open-ended thing, and we basically just told them, what's the most kind of memorable or notable thing that happened in your relationship each day? And then they wrote about the positive emotions, or they just rated how much emotions they experienced during that event each day. And we had independent coders rate for or just assess whether there was gratitude exchange that occurred during that event each day. And our prediction was that if people had higher approach motivation, they would have more positive emotion associated with the gratitude event that day. And so what you can see here is a multi-level within-person analyses examining whether approach motivation moderates the association between the presence of gratitude and the experience of positive emotion on a particular day. And so this dotted line, that's probably a little bit hard to see, is people who are higher in approach motivation. The line below, the solid line, is people who are lower in approach motivation. And so when people who are higher in approach motivation have a day on which they report a gratitude event, they're more likely to report positive emotions as compared to people who are lower in approach motivation. They essentially get less out of those gratitude days than people who are higher in approach motivation. So this again supports our idea that people who are higher in approach motivation are reacting more strongly to this positively valence event. So we found solid support for this idea that, these events are positive and they tend to be good for most people, but you have to consider motivation. That these people who are higher in approach motivation are experiencing more from these sweet events, and partners are actually noticing that they're experiencing more. And it does indirectly spill over into the partner's experiences via the individual's emotional experience. So this has implications for both of these literatures. Thinking about the approach motivation literature, it suggests that reactivity is a key mechanism. It's not just exposure that is influencing people who are higher in approach motivation to having a lot of these key outcomes. And also for these positive interpersonal processes literature. So we know that these are generally quote unquote good. They have positive outcomes, but they are potentially even better for people who have this certain motivational orientation. So we can't just talk about how positive interactions are good in blanket terms. We need to consider the motivation of people who are engaging in these interactions. And possibly people who are very, very low in approach motivation might not get as much from these interactions as we might think. So I've talked about positive emotions. I've talked about motivation, and I've talked about these key relational interactions, social support, gratitude, and capitalization. So what I now want to move to is talking about some of my more recent and current work where I'm examining mindfulness, meditation, and psychophysiological processes in relationships. So most recently, I've become very interested in mindfulness and meditation because of the present focus, attention, and acceptance of experiences that really characterizes mindfulness. This is the way that I really define mindfulness. There's a lot of definitions out there, but two key components of it involve this present focus attention, combined with an acceptance of present moment experiences. And the nice thing about this, the concept of mindfulness is that it can be cultivated through meditation. And we know that meditation has a host of benefits. These ideas have relevance to almost all aspects of my research. So you'll notice that in this initial diagram of my research program that I presented, you didn't see mindfulness anywhere on here, despite the fact that I called my research Motivation, Affect, and Mindfulness in Relationships. Well, I did that on purpose because at the end here, I wanted to show you how I integrate mindfulness and meditation into my research program. Well, prior research has extensively demonstrated that mindfulness and meditation are associated kind of directly with mental and physical well-being. But we also know that mindfulness has tremendous capacity to influence emotional regulation. So we know that they have the potential to shift both motivation and affect. And if that is true, mindfulness very much has the capacity to indirectly shift key relational interactions. And so that's one reason why I've been so interested in mindfulness, is because to the extent that mindfulness and meditation can shift motivation and affect, that should therefore be key to shifting these relational interactions that I'm so interested in. Additionally, mindfulness and meditation may directly have beneficial influence on these relational interactions by inhibiting harmful communication or enhancing perspective taking. All of this research is really in its beginning stages. And so in my current and future research, I am exploring a lot of these ideas. So just to give you a few examples, I recently published results from a randomized controlled trial examining meditation and social approach and avoidance goals. I have a study on attachment and meditation and affective outcomes, and a paper under review on meditation training and fluctuations in social connectedness across time. So in this randomized controlled trial, we examined how after participants had engaged in training in both mindfulness and loving kindness meditation, after 4 weeks of this training, we examined their levels of approach and avoidance goals. And what we found was that participants who had been trained in loving kindness meditation reported lower levels of avoidance motivation as compared to participants who had been assigned to a waitlist control. And avoidance motivation has been associated with a number of social outcomes, some of which tend to be maladaptive, others which tend to be mixed. And so this suggests that loving kindness meditation may have some potential social benefits associated with it, perhaps via these motivational mechanisms that I'm so interested in. In study 2, I'm actually very excited about this. This study, and especially I know some folks mentioned being interested in attachment and mindfulness, so this is really quite relevant to that. So in this study, which just is now in press at Emotion, we were looking at how does attachment orientation moderate the influence of mindfulness meditation and loving kindness meditation across the course of time. And so what you're seeing here are how do people experience change across the course of time with respect to negative emotions in terms of a mindfulness and loving kindness training. And so what we're seeing here is that people who are higher in attachment anxiety are the people who are benefiting in terms of their affective outcomes across the course of time. So these people in the solid line, they are higher in attachment anxiety. People with the dashed line are lower in attachment anxiety. And it's those people who are high in attachment anxiety who are really experiencing declines in negative emotions across the course of time. People who are in the dashed line are actually not experiencing significant declines in terms of attachment anxiety or in terms of negative emotions. And this is something that we saw pretty consistently, was that the affective benefits of meditation were very much experienced by people who are at average levels or high levels of attachment anxiety, whereas people who were at low levels of attachment anxiety were not really experiencing the affective benefits of meditation. Finally, I have this research under review, which is looking at how does meditation influence fluctuations in social connectedness? So there's a lot of emerging research that suggests it's not just average levels of social relationships and social well-being that matters. It's how does the consistency of our social connectedness play a role in our broader well-being? And so what I've been interested in recently is examining, well, how does our meditation kind of smooth out our experience of social connectedness? And what we find in this research is that both mindfulness and loving kindness training tends to smooth out our social connectedness across the course of this intervention. And then actually, once people stop meditating, it starts to slightly increase again at the end of this intervention. And so this is currently under review at Mindfulness. Finally, in my current work at UCSF, I've started integrating biological processes into my work. I'm super excited about this work. Researchers in the relationships literature have really talked about what are the precise biological mechanisms by which relationships influence health. We have some research on this that's especially looking at things like conflict and social support, but there's a lot of work to be done on positive interpersonal processes, which I'm excited about doing. And so just a couple of examples, I'm interested in how I'm working on a paper with Amy Gordon and Wendy Mendez, looking at relational fluctuations in both positive and negative aspects of relationships and how that influences daily blood pressure. And then I'm working on a paper with Alyssa, which I'm super excited about, that looks at how mindfulness might moderate the influence of relationship conflict on daily cortisol trajectories. So just to give you a summary, how can we understand Bay and Jay's mental and physical well-being? One answer is their pivotal relational interactions. When they engage in social support and capitalization and gratitude in daily life, this really affects their mental and physical well-being. So why are these pivotal interactions sometimes successful and other times not so great? We can really understand these interactions in terms of their pre-existing motivations and affective experiences, things like their approach, motivation, and their positive emotions. So what can we do to enhance these pivotal social interactions and therefore their mental and physical well-being? One potential option is meditation. And more research is needed, which is why someone should hire me. That's for the job talk, not for this talk, but yeah. Nice. So that's the end of my talk. And I would be happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
It's always weird to not hear the claps, but you can see them. Wonderful, amazing job, Brian.